Hey guys, it's the tiniest of Logans back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Strix RTX graphics cards. Now you may need to want to, brilliant English Tom, you may want to stay tuned because I am going to tackle my thoughts on the pricing. Okay, so the Strix cards do look incredibly familiar to what we would be used to with the way they were in the past, because obviously they've been with us for a few years now and the cooler design has evolved a fair bit. Or has it, really, when you think about it? Because they have been really subtle, but the stuff that's gone on under the hood has technically made them a much better and superior card. I say superior, but I don't mean against the competition. I mean against the ones that come out initially. So with these, there's not a great deal of difference between them at first glance. But when you really dig in and start to get picky with them, you can see a few very minor changes. But there's this same sort of thick looking heatsink to it that we would have seen on the 1080 Ti. It's a great looking card. There's also a big brace that runs all the way around the outside of the card and right the way underneath, and that actually helps cool the memory in certain places as well. But the brace is mainly to help sort of cope with the weight because there is a big heatsink on it. They do both share the same dual 8-pin power configuration. If you do dig a little bit deeper though, you can have a look around the back, and the 2080, the plain vanilla one, doesn't have the 4-pin or PWM fan headers on the back of the card, but the 1080 Ti does. So you can see the difference there. They've both got the RGB connector, but only the Ti has the extra fan connectors on the back. This would be, so if you really wanted to, you would be able to connect some of your case fans up to give you direct airflow over the cards. Although when I talk to you about temperatures later on, if you've got a half decent case, it's really not going to be something you're going to need to worry about that much. If you dig in a little bit deeper, you can see the back plates are slightly different. The 2080 Ti has an extra opening with a few extra components on it. So you can see there's the extra cutout there. But when you kind of rotate it round a little bit, there's actually a couple missing in another place that the 2080 still has. So there's a few very, very minor differences there. There's also a BIOS switch. If you flick the BIOS switch, you either need to restart or it's better just to flick it over when the machine is actually turned off. But if it's flicked towards the back of the card, so where the display connectors are, if it's flicked over towards that, then that's in performance mode. If you have it towards the back of the card, then that's actually in a quiet mode, and it will make differences to the fan speeds, and it will also make some minor changes to your clock speeds as well. Now I do need to talk to you about clock speeds because we have a lot to talk about with clock speeds really, and that is, I have tested this as it would come straight out of the box. Now if you test it straight out of the box, it's technically in gaming mode. If you install the Asus GPU Tweak software, you can flick it into overclock mode and get better performance without a manual overclock. It just gives it a little bit more power. Now, with the old cards, I would have instantly gone in and turned it into OC mode, but with these ones, it's been a little while, I completely forgot, and for me to go and do an entire other batch of testing would have taken me at least another 2.5 days. So, my fault. I'm telling you right from the start that the stock results would be better if we made that one change in the software. But there's going to be, it's also a good way that you can look at it in that a lot of people are just going to buy this, fit it, install the NVIDIA driver and leave it. So you're going to know that performance. But I've still done some clock speed runs with the NVIDIA overclock scanner, just to give you an idea. But then I've also done a full manual overclock and rerun all my tests anyway as well. Now, when you have a look at the clock speed graph, the reason why we bring a graph up is because at the end of the day, we are big advocates for paying more attention to your average clock speed rather than the peak. The peak is meaningless if it only runs for a split second, whereas the average over a consistent run that we do exactly the same way every time we test it, gives us a really good idea on how this is going to perform in games. And the higher your average clock speed, the higher your frames per second are going to be more consistently through the games, because the way that these cards work nowadays is they're not going to run at 100% throughout the entirety of your game. They will literally, and it'd be nice if we could just fix them to run absolutely nuts once a 3D app had opened, but it's all to do with power consumption and all that sort of stuff. I don't completely understand the absolutely nitty-gritty of it, in the fact that the clock speeds can move around so much, because let's face it, we'd like them just to stay as high as they could when we were actually playing our games, but this is what we've got to put up with. So your clock speeds here, you can see, are incredibly healthy, to the point where it was a bit of it kind of went to the top of all of them. Now, the manual overclock was the big one. The best thing that I can stress with these is focus on the power limit. Don't worry about the fact that you can't turn your volts up or anything like that. That's a bit of an old school thing. It's something that people still kind of go nuts about. You're only really going to need to tweak voltages if you're a hardcore overclocker with literally an immense amount of knowledge. If you're a normal user, or someone like me that's a normal user that pretends he knows a little bit more than everybody else, then stick to the power limit and working around that, because you'll get much better results through the power limit. And also with the voltage, that's their best way to kill them. And it was the same with the last generation as well, which is why when I do my overclock, power limit, that's all you really need to worry about. Beyond that, it's kind of fine tuning, and sometimes even with these cards you can find that sometimes a little bit of an undervolt can actually do you better favours. I know it sounds like AMD, but it's just the way it is, and it's also one of the reasons why they don't, with a lot of cards, they don't let you touch the volts anymore, and it's not so much of a bad thing. It will really stop you killing them in the long run. So the clock speeds are really nice. 3D Mark Graph works really well as well. One thing I will say is, if you want to go to the Overclock 3D website, you can see all the screenshots over there. You can see loads more graphs. You can see loads more games, because I can't remember with this one. It's over 20 pages, 26 pages, 28 pages, I can't remember. Anyway, there's loads more tests. One thing that I'll also say is 1080 Ti has been added in on all of the new games on the website. Just because we ran out of time, and the way that we did our testing ready for the main bulk of the review meant that we didn't have the 1080 Ti in the very, very latest games, like 2018, F1 2018, which I'll put up for you. And things like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, there was another one as well. And anyway, so we've gone back in and we've edited in those results back into the written reviews on the website, and they'll be in all of the ones from now on out. So, F1 2018 game-wise is one of the few, well, it was the only new one that it didn't top the graph on. When you move on to Final Fantasy, this is a benchmark that NVIDIA sent us. It spits out numbers, and I think it's something to do with the amount of frames per second throughout the run. And it just adds and totals them all up. At least I think that's the way they're doing it. But anyway, it did very well with this when you look at where they're all placed. Shows that the manual overclock did really well as well. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was much of the same thing, although this one was quite close when you look at the numbers down the outside. Literally 1 frames per second different on the 1440 run. And with the GPU temperature testing, yes, it's massive. Then I shrink it, show you a little bit more. Even with a manual overclock, the card did manage to keep the temps below 70 degrees with the fans on auto. So you're going to be thinking to yourself, well, it's obviously just span the fans real quick. No, it was actually still really quiet, annoyingly. The cooler on this does work exceptionally well. Cool, calm, collected, even on auto. To be fair, it's one of those sort of cars that you just kind of fit and forget. And we had it in performance mode as well, not quiet mode. So if you did want to make it a little bit quieter, the temps would sneak their way up a little bit more. But in all honesty, I don't think there's going to be many of you that are going to want to flick that quiet switch unless you literally live in an entirely shut down closed room. So, conclusion time. Now this is going to be quite a difficult one for me, because at the end of the day, the Asus cards with the automated process, so they're made by robots basically. Personally, I've had a lot of them come and go, but also come and be abused, because and I don't want you to make that sound like I'm being arrogant, but sometimes when you're short on time and you've got deadlines and you've got lots of work to get done, stuff does get moved and used around a lot. it's a much harsher environment than you would ever use at home, because normally fit and forget, sometimes it gets taken out for a bit of cleaning. With the stuff that I do, they're literally on sides and on piles, and because we've got a lot of work to get done in not a lot of time, and that's a lot of the reason why some days just go on into the early hours of the morning. So anyway, the Asus ones, I think I've had one die, and that was a 1060 quite a while ago. It might have been a 960 actually, but it was one of the early Strixes. And I'm not going to say that it was their fault or it was my fault. It didn't last long after it got in. It had only gone into the rig. It was just, you are going to end up with one of those cards. But the ones that get abused, they've always been all right. And they're consistently better overclockers. They're consistently at the top of the graphs. And they are consistently, they are that little bit, sort of like quieter and run better. But with the prices this time, the 2080 is £1,006 MSRP, so that's manufactured suggested retail price. Now that is only suggested, so the prices from there can both go up and down. But what I would say with this card is, yes, it did do very well, and yes, it was cool, calm and collected, but it's, to be honest with you, it's that close to the 1080 Ti Founders at 1099 that I would sincerely say you would have to question whether you couldn't find another £100 over the next month or 6 weeks to upgrade to the Ti. Because if you upgrade to the Ti, the difference in performance is monumental. And from the performance of the Strix, even with a manual overclock, to the Founders, it is quite large. Now, one thing I do want to say is, if you're here because you've got an all Asus rig, I'm not going to tell you not to buy it, because at the end of the day, I understand the fact that you want everything to match. But one of the things I would say is, if you want an all Asus rig and you've not bought it yet, the prices of these cards, if you were in the market for a 1080 Ti and you're thinking to yourself, right, Founders is going to be about 1100, so I'm probably going to pay about 1200, maybe 1300 if they're really high price. I have to pick my words carefully. But then the price for the 2080 Ti comes out. Overclockers have it at £1,500. The thing is they've told me that I think the MSRP for the Turbo, which is their blower card, was £1,275. The Dual, which is the one below the Strix with just the 2 fans on it, looks a bit like the Founders Edition, but plastic shroud and stuff. That was £1,350. So from that point, you can kind of get where the prices are going. So you're going to assume that if the Dual was £1,350, then this is not too much of a stretch of the imagination to say this is going to be in the retailers somewhere between £1,450 and, as OC UK have got it listed, at £1,499. It's just too much. It is too much over. Yes, it has topped the graphs, but not £350. Sorry, £400 more worth. So we'll say £350 will be nice. It's not £350 more performance or cooling or anything that's going on in there. It's just a little bit of a stretch too far. I genuinely would say that if they made the 2080 $899 and then they made the 2080 Ti $1299, that's still ridiculous expensive. I get that. It's a lot of money. And we're only comparing this to the Founders Edition cards. We're not comparing this to the 1080 Ti's and the prices that they were in the past, because it gets too complicated when we start talking about that. So compared to those cards, those sort of prices, they're still going to get moaned at about the pricing, but it's at the kind of level where you would expect Asus. People always moan about the way I say that, but it is always Asus, not Asus or whatever else that they try and say I'm saying. But it would be at a level where you're kind of used to. People were still going to moan, especially people that weren't actually going to buy it, but it's so expensive that it gives them something to moan about. But when you go from kind of that to the prices that they actually are now, it is too much of a stretch of the imagination. So what I would honestly say is I do need to do more testing on other cards, okay? I have tested another brand already, and the performance is so close, I don't think they're worth that much more. And I don't understand why the prices are that high. Because, and yeah, at the end of the day, let's face facts. I like the Acer stuff. I like all hardware, but I appreciate what they're trying to do, and I get that the cooler's really nice, and I do get that they are that little bit quicker. But it's not a little bit more expensive. It's a CPU. I mean, the 2080 Ti, you could buy an 8700K for the price difference. And what I would genuinely say is, if it does come to that point where you're like, you're a new, you're coming into the high-end market as a new purchaser, you're going to be buying yourself a whole new rig, and you have to decide, do I spend that much more money on the Strix, or do I save that much more money and buy another brand and then put it into, I don't know, maybe you're going to upgrade your CPU a little bit more. Maybe you're going to buy yourself a bigger M.2. Maybe you're going to buy yourself, let's put it in a better way for gaming, a better monitor. I'd go with the better monitor. I genuinely would. There was lots of other things that I wanted to say about this, and what I needed to do in the end is I needed to sit myself down, calm myself down, and take the personal side of it out. And I needed to just look at it as raw numbers. But I can't help kind of scratching my head with these and kind of thinking to myself, what are they thinking? Because they're cracking cards. I can't really fault them other than the price. So the best thing that I can say is I'm not giving either of them awards because I think the prices are that little bit too high. No, not that little bit too high. Well, it's a little bit too high on the 2080, but the 2080 Ti is just silly levels higher. I don't think that they're worth that little bit, that monstrous amount extra. And it's a shame because I can honestly see, I mean, I've looked online, I've seen there's already a lot of negative feedback about this. And the thing is, for a change, I completely agree. So they tick all the boxes. So the best thing that I can say right now is Asus, for the love of God, you need to sort the prices out on these. You genuinely do, because you're starting to create a negative wave against the brand now. So you've built this epic brand out, and now with these prices, it's a step too far. And I genuinely, they're going to sell, don't get me wrong, there's going to be people that are going to buy them. But in all honesty, it's one of the few times now where I would look at these and I would look at how strong the competition is, and I don't understand why you would pay that much extra more. It's just not worth it. And I'm not going to go round in circles anymore, but I'm just going to close with a big sigh. And I'm hoping that shows you how